Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and these are my Colonel Commissars Ibram Gaunts. I'm starting to get quite the collection. One specific one to note is this one from the 2021 Gaunt's Ghost set, as that set is incorrectly sized. It is too big. But what if I went the other way and made one smaller? A lot smaller. I poked around in various places for a while, searching for what could become my tiny Ibram Gaunt, and quickly realised that an epic scale model, that being 6mm tall, would be perfect. After a little observing of prices and second-hand and all of that sort of boring stuff, I snagged these. Officers and Commissars for Epic 40k. They are so small and hard to focus a camera on, which will become a running theme for this video, I think. Utterly tiny, but surprisingly detailed. Each has a sword, and whilst one has an empty hand, the rest have bolt pistols. A recognisable Commissar's hat and storm coat. I was really impressed by these, and somewhat wondering just how I could paint them. Also wondering how I would move them around without losing them. But that was an easy one to solve by cutting off some pieces of sprue. I'll let you into a little joke. This is actually from the Gaunt's Ghost 2021 sprue. Gluing each of the epic commissars to a small chunk of that sprue, and then that chunk to a longer section of sprue, just so that I could hold on to them and move them around without losing them. Even with these models as detailed as they are, there is one important detail that was missing. With the Tanith First and Only, Gaunt wears a Tanith camo cloak. I've shown a few occasions my learnings, my practice and my techniques for sculpting cloaks on the 2832 sized Gaunt's Ghost models, and even on a 54mm one as well. These are entirely different. Being less than 1/5 of the size, I tried my best, but realistically this is pushing my sculpting skills to make something this small. My process became essentially squishing a piece of milliput under my finger to create a small flat sheet, pressing that into the back of the model and then prodding at it with my sculpting tools to try to get it to stick. I think it's possible that these metal models would have mold release on them, causing my milliput to not stick very well. I usually wash the metal models, but I didn't with these. A mistake that bears repeating. And by the time I was getting the hang of the scale, I had finished all of these cloaks. They aren't perfect by far, but they are just about the correct shape, and I even managed to press in the shape of the hood on some of them. Usually I'd add material for that, but at this scale I wasn't able to. Now just an explanation of why I added that extra sliver of sprue on every single one, and that is to use my base mold that I've been using for a while, to put models that are on pudding bases or similar sorts of small bases onto a normal size gaming base. I have a video about it a little while ago. To ensure that these tiny models sat high enough over the resin and to make sure they didn't fall over into it, the sliver of sprue acts as the extra level of the pudding base. Usually these models would be put together on a single rectangle base for the Epic 40k game, but I'm using these for something else that I'll mention later. Once the resin was done, I needed to hide the pulling resin shape at the edge of the base, and the height of the models due to that extra sprue piece. So I added stones and baking powder with superglue to each of them to give that kind of variety of sizes and texture. Usually I use much bigger stones on the bases of my Tanith First, but to sell the scale on these, I used the smallest gravel stones that I could find. Priming and then painting the bases first seemed like a good idea. Dry brushing the base got some paint on the models, and it's easier to paint over that rather than correct it afterwards. Then came what I thought would be the hardest step, actually painting them. However, it wasn't quite as bad as it would seem. I used a very sharp brush and filled in all of the various colours, paying very close attention to the dilution of my paint. I got black for the uniform, green for the cloak and blue for the sword of Hieronymo. I decided against metallics, and instead I painted those tiny little bits that would be silver instead in a lighter grey. The finest work I did was the yellow and red lining of the uniform. Essentially, the entirety of each of these models was simply base coated, but at the size of these models, base coating feels like precision detail work. Bear in mind that each of these models are about the same size as a normal model's head, and that's about as much as I could do with the Gaunt models themselves when it came to painting. But they don't really sell the scale very well. They look a little bit lonely on these large 25mm bases. And so to bring in some of the environment that would exist around these models inside the base, I took out some milliput to create some foliage. Some extra little details just to make the bases feel a little less open, rocky, barren place. I used the dot of superglue to keep little pieces of milliput stuck to some toothpicks, rolled it into a rounded cone shape, and then taking another toothpick, just poking irregular gouges into the sides of the milliput to hint at the shape of leaves or branches. These are hardly very well detailed, but so long as they look in scale and they help the model look more in place, then that's all they need to do. And after giving them the simplest of paint jobs, I drilled holes into each of the bases and threaded the toothpicks through, glued from underneath and clipped the excess. And I made enough of them to get 2 of these trees, and I actually made an extra one so one of them gets 3. And there is a big effort for this smallest models. Probably the smallest models I've ever painted. I mentioned that there's a reason why they're on separate bases, and that is because they are gifts for some of the people who have helped me out in the Gaunt's Ghost community. With only 5, well 4 because I'm keeping 1, there's not enough to go around. This community has a wealth of good people willing to help with information, supplies and models. Now don't go helping just to get one of these because they're all gone now. But if you do wish to help me out, there's a donation link in the description. You can share your thoughts in the comment section below and even share this video out to all of your model painting friends. But with all that hard work done, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.